The events of the night would have to be addressed at some point, but for now they did what they did best, pretended everything was fine. TOG, Cecil and Smurphy burst into the house, all TOG and Cecil both speaking at once, breathless, slightly pale, and, in Cecil's case, still mildly intoxicated. Mrs. TOG sat at the kitchen table, arms crossed, with a glass of wine in front of her, with the air of a woman who had absolutely no patience left to give. She didn't even look up as they stumbled in.
"I take it you three idiots nearly got yourselves killed out there,"
she said, picking up her wine and swirling it in her glass.
You wouldn't believe what just happened in the shed, missus. Even if you had seen it yourself,
TOG exclaimed with anticipation of how his wife might react.
"Oh, I believe a great many things, TOG,"
she said dryly.
"For instance, I believe you're a bum nugget. I believe Cecil is a drunken menace. And I believe that if you tracked mud into my clean kitchen again, you're sleeping in the shed."
but you don't understand.
TOG objected.
"Oh, I understand perfectly.
She finally looked up, eyes narrowing.
You've been out there getting yourself in a right state, and now you've come in here to blabber on about some ridiculous nonsense, and I, quite frankly, am too bloody tired for it."
Cecil flopped into a chair, kicking his feet up on the table.
All right, so picture this. Me, TOG, and the magic space dog in a freezing cold shed, right?
"Feet off my table, you gremlin."
Cecil reluctantly removed his boots from the table and continued.
Suddenly, bam! Reality itself starts collapsing. It gets cold as a politician's heart. The lights flicker, the air turns to ice, and then this massive evil devil of doom, made of pure nightmare, appears.
Mrs. TOG rolled her eyes.
"Oh, now you're just being dramatic."
Oh, I'm sorry.
Cecil said, placing a hand on his chest.
Would you rather I just say, oh dear? We saw a mildly concerning entity of shadow and despair. How perfectly quaint.
That sounds more reasonable, yes.
Missus, this is really serious.
TOG interjected, attempting to bring the conversation to a more serious tone, something he knows Cecil is incapable of.
It was utterly terrifying.
Mrs. TOG squinted at him.
Okay then, tell me, on a scale of I've lost my socks to I've seen the state of Cecil's underpants, how terrifying was it?
TOG pondered for a second, then
You're wearing Cecil's underpants on your head.
she put her wine down.
Well, that is bad. Very bad.
Smurphy, who had been patiently waiting for the theatrics to die down, cleared his throat.
I hate to interrupt this or stimulating conversation, but I must inform you, the apparition was not random. It was a messenger.
Mrs. TOG sighed.
Oh, of course it was.
TOG snapped.
Let the dog speak.
Fine. But if he starts talking about horoscopes or destiny, I'm going to need something stronger than wine.
Smurphy continued, his voice serious.
The creature that appeared to us was a messenger from the ancient evil that is awakening. It knows who you are now, TOG. It knows that you are the hero foretold in the scriptures.
The kitchen fell silent. Mrs. TOG blinked at him.
Hang on! How would it know that?
Smurphy sighed.
The ancient writings of the first humans who left your galaxy, millions of years ago, wrote of the reawakening of an ancient beast. The new humans would awaken it, and one of them, the hero, would have to fight against it to prevent the destruction of mankind. The scriptures also tell of a messenger of doom, an entity or a being crafted of darkness, hatred, and malice. This messenger of doom would lead an army, forged from spheres filled with forgotten knowledge, guardians of the past, and harbingers of doom in the future.
Smurphy paused.
They are ancient scriptures. They don't make much sense.
Mrs. TOG put her head in her hands.
Oh, for God's sake.
Cecil, on the other hand, grinned.
Well, well, well. Our boy TOG, our very own legendary hero, riding or flying into battle against ancient armies of evil monsters. This is going to be epic.
Tog groaned, rubbing his temples.
All right, so if I am this hero, what am I actually supposed to do?
Smurphy's eyes darkened.
We must find the truth in the past. There is knowledge hidden in ancient history, knowledge that may tell us about this evil, this darkness, knowledge purposely sealed away. It is foretold that one day someone or something would, without knowing, unlock 3 seals. These 3 seals were forged to imprison the evil beast. The first seal to break will unleash the messenger. The second seal unleashes the army. The third seal releases the beast.
Tog sighed.
Crikey, O'Reilly. This gets worse by the minute. Okay, so find the truth in the past. Smurphy, how did all this start then?
Smurphy's ears twitched.
Millions of years ago, there was a war. A war between a race of ancient beings, the Guardians, and a terrifying alien species known as the Thargoids. The conflict lasted for centuries, and its secrets remain buried. Out of this conflict, the beast was created. A beast that this ancient race brought into being. However, once the Thargoids were defeated, the beast turned on its creators. We need to learn what truly happened, because I suspect that whatever is waking up now is linked to that war.
Cecil sat up.
Excellent. Ancient wars. Rebellious beings, what more could you wish for?
Tog sighed.
And where, pray tell, do we find information on this ancient war?
Smurphy nodded.
We must find Ram-Ta.
Tog squinted.
Who the bloody hell is Ram-Ta?
He is the leading scientist on ancient history and lost civilizations. His research has uncovered knowledge of the Guardian species, who fought the Thargoids. If anyone knows what we need, it is him.
And where do we find him?
He is at Phoenix Base, in the Mean system.
Mrs. Tog sighed, rubbing her temples.
So let me get this straight. A shadow demon just popped into our lives, declared my husband a hero, and now you lot are running off on some intergalactic scavenger hunt for a bloke named Ram-Ta.
That's the gist of it, yes.
Exclaimed Cecil. Cecil laughed and clapped Tog on the back.
All right, old boy. Looks like we're off to see the wizard. Or the historian. Same thing, really.
Tog groaned, putting his head on the table.
I hate my life.
Smurphy gave a small smile.
Well, get used to it, hero. We leave at dawn.
The morning air was crisp as Tog, Cecil and Smurphy stood before the battered orange Sidewinder, its garish red graffiti, Twazek, gleaming in the early sunlight. The ship sat in the old hangar, humming faintly, its systems booting up for the first time in years. Mrs. Tog stood with her arms crossed, wrapped in her old dressing gown, her expression hovering somewhere between annoyance and mild heartbreak.
Right then.
She said, voice sharp in an attempt to cover up the real emotions.
Off you sod, go on. Off to save the galaxy, the caped crusading hero and his crazy sidekicks. What a load of nonsense. I expect you back for tea. And don't go crashing this orange Sidewinder.
Pointing at the ship.
Last time you tried to park it, you took out half the bloody greenhouse.
Cecil grinned.
Oh, don't worry, Mrs. Tog. I'll keep an eye on him.
Mrs. Tog turned her glare on Cecil.
Oh, that's reassuring. You keeping an eye on things when you can't even keep your bloody balance half of the time.
Mrs. Tog rolled her eyes and turned back to Tog, the emotions finally showing through, said sadly.
And you, my very own bum nugget, my eternal headache. Try not to get yourself killed. If some terrifying space demon shows up, do the smart thing and run away. You're not exactly hero material.
Mrs. Tog sighed, then grabbed his face with both hands and planted a firm kiss right on his forehead.
I love you, Tog.
Tog blinked, momentarily stunned.
That was oddly affectionate.
Don't get used to it,
she muttered, stepping back. Then she turned to Cecil. She sighed deeply, then pulled him into a bone-crushing hug, nearly knocking the wind out of him.
I swear to God, Cecil,
She said into his ear.
if you get him killed, I will personally drag your useless carcass out of the afterlife and make you clean the kitchen for eternity.
Don't you worry, Mrs. Tog.
Cecil wheezed, face squished against her shoulder.
I will take good care of him. You can trust me.
And finally she looked at Smurfy. For a long moment she just stared at him. Smurfy tilted his head.
Mrs. Tog?
He asked. She let out a sharp breath.
I don't care if you're from another universe. You are an adorable little dog, and I swear if anything happens to you...
Before Smurfy could react, she scooped him up and squeezed him tightly, burying her face in his fur. Smurfy was visibly taken aback and wasn't sure what to do at first, but then gave in to the hug and nuzzled her neck with his little black wet nose. After a few seconds, she released him and composed herself, acting as if nothing had happened.
Right!
She said briskly, straightening her dressing gown.
Get going then, before I change my mind and chain you all to the kitchen chairs.
Tog gave a small, lopsided smile.
You are going to miss us, aren't you?
Mrs. Tog scowled.
Don't be ridiculous.
She stepped back as the sidewinder's hatch opened, and one by one they climbed aboard. Cecil brought up the rear, and like Errol Flynn with one foot in the door and one on the steps, leaning slightly backwards, taking on the aura of a magnificent hero about to embark on an epic voyage, declared,
My fellow humans and fellow space travelers and all those unfortunate enough to be in earshot today, we embark on a mission most perilous, a mission fraught with dangers untold, with terrors unimaginable, and, quite frankly, with a distressing lack of room to swing a cat in this here ship. We may be old, we may be frail, some of us may not even remember why we walked into a room half the time, but make no mistake, this will not be our undoing. No, it is precisely because we are old that we shall be victorious, for we have lived long enough to be completely indifferent to common sense, self-preservation, and the laws of physics. We shall go to the stars. We shall navigate the black void with the graze of a one-winged pigeon in a wind tunnel. We shall fight in the asteroid belts. We shall fight around the spaceports. We shall fight in the suspiciously sticky back booths of the station bars, and we shall never surrender. And when our bones creak, when our knees pop like faulty landing gear, when even the ship's AI calls us a couple of senile old muppets, we shall press on. Because this evil may be ancient, it may be powerful, but it has never faced old-timers with a hip replacement made of pure stubbornness. Nothing to lose but our memory. So let us board the orange sidewinder named Twazik. Let us take to the stars, and let us prove once and for all that age and alcohol consumption are no barriers to heroism. To glory, my friends, and to an appropriate amount of wine along the way.
Cecil waved to Mrs. Tog and entered the ship. As the ship's door latched closed and the motley crew started preparing to take off, with a tear in her eye, Mrs. Tog gave the slightest of smiles, took a long, slow breath. As she slowly released the breath, whispered,
Fly safe, my darlings. Come back to me soon.